Get in, losers! We're going debunking. Hi, I'm Critfax, a cartoon fox on the internet whose specialty is anti-transphobia edutainment. My goal is to make you laugh hard enough that you become a better person, and one of the ways we do that is to point out things people are doing and saying that are bad so that you know better. One of the main vectors of transphobia is to portray us as unreliable narrators, saying that we're delusional, that we can't even perceive reality correctly, so how could we describe it correctly? Saying we are prone to deception anyway, that even if we had a grip on reality, we'd just lie about it to trick people into giving us unearned luxuries like healthcare, basic human dignity, or clean drinking water. And sometimes, people get so evil with their portrayals of transgender people that their dehumanizing caricatures of us are that we only exist because our broken brains have become indoctrinated into a cult-level adherence to a belief system that is logically incompatible with itself. Which is especially rich coming from the Rowlingites, who think that we make detailed medical plans with doctors to change our anatomy, while being delusional about what anatomy we currently have. And that we're doing this all so we can sneak into bathrooms and replace people who aren't going anywhere. Wait, that mug looks familiar. I'm pretty sure I've fought with that hateful loser before. Apparently it's by a group called LGB United, but the person who wrote this particular article happens to be the person in their Twitter PFP, and they go by the name Eva Kurilova. Yup, it's her. Lol, fuck her. Look at how we've both grown since you blocked me. I've got my own show, an entire 1,000 subscribers, and you've got a blog. Anyway, before we delve into the article, I want to point out one last thing, which is that the homepage for The Distance mentions that it calls itself a politically homeless shelter from woke and left-right discourse. Is it an all-female politically homeless shelter? If you see shoes in the locker room that are too big, do you get in your car and... we know. Gender-critical ideology exploits the feeling of alienation people feel when they are called out on their bigotry. It's not a flex that your recruitment only works on people who have been ejected from the left because you couldn't grow out of your transphobia. As anyone who's been watching our videos for a while knows, politically homeless is basically code for right-wing but too scared to say so, or I was nominally left of Republicans until you meanies insisted I extend basic human dignity to everyone, including the transes. Besides that, saying you provide a shelter from woke and left-right discourse also gives them an easy excuse to not take any responsibility when their takes inevitably do end up overlapping with those on the far right. Again,
the endless contradictions of gender ideology. The list goes on and on. Repeat after us. Trans women are women.
Right off the bat, the article comes in swinging with its title, The Endless Contradictions of Gender Ideology. We've already established in our previous videos that the term gender ideology was mostly invented by the Catholic Church to sow division within feminist and LGBTQ+ communities. Quoting from the United Nations, at its inception, the notion of gender ideology was created by religious leaders to halt advances regarding women's empowerment. Later, in its most recent version, it was also introduced by the Russian state in the 2000s to mean anyone not being cisgender and heterosexual or being a feminist. Essentially, anyone not being a cishet adherent to the patriarchy is a danger to society and must perform gender ideology from the evil Western nations to destroy the Russian way of life. You may find it familiar from every extremist ever. If you're not forced into my way of being, I'll go extinct! Well, then perish, jackass. Kinda weird that this supposed gender ideology is both a pet project of the West to undermine Russia and foster Western supremacy, but also an attempt to destroy Western civilization. It's almost like they're both lying about us in order to grasp at power, and that they know they are doing exactly that. Or it's just a vague term used by some jerks and not meant to be considered in the context of anything but national. But wait a minute. This sounds awfully familiar. Link to the source in the doobly-doo. Gender criticals don't seem to care about this fact anymore, though. They've long since made the term a mainstay part of their anti-trans vocabulary, and they don't care if it's anti-feminist lingo invented by the religious right. But all you need is some centrist complicity, and suddenly the right wing has reframed gender studies as a frivolous category of debris programs pursued by incompetent and overly emotional blue-haired slacktivists. But personally, I think the pursuit of fixing sexism is worthy of being a respected vocation, because I think people deserve a fair and just society to get to live in, just as long as you're willing to be a part of the just and fair part. By the way, that photograph is from a protest called #AddressTheNation by an activist group called DAZE. This protest took place in July of 2018, while this article was published on the 16th of October 2023. I point this out because I feel like it clearly demonstrates how out of touch GCs are with the current political climate. But hey, some GCs don't even want to admit we've been around longer than 5 years, which is especially silly because their holy text, which we did our own deep dive into, was published in the 70s and is older than most living trans people. But I'm sure it's just a phase, and we'll all be Thanos snapped into accepting our sexes or whatever any day now. While they do link to the activist group's website, the way this image is used as the article's header makes it seem like the projection of the slogan onto the Ministry of Justice in London is a recent event, when it was only one part of a bigger leftist protest that took place over 5 years ago. I also wonder why Ava chose to not use this picture instead. Ilret frot futfut us transviven ape mim. Yeah, probably should have used a more level surface, but you work with what you got. To further drive home the point, here's J.K. Rowling retweeting this exact same image on October the 17th. Where do you think she found that image? The mind boggles.
Anyone who is paying any attention knows that gender ideology is brimming with blatant contradictions. Sometimes all you need to open someone's eyes to the absurdity of this ideology is to point these contradictions out. Once you see so many of them laid out before you, it becomes impossible to take gender activists seriously. It's also pretty sad to see what a charade society has fallen for, but at least it gives us something to darkly laugh about.
Okay, she is literally the Chud Wojak. She just said society has fallen.
The West has fallen. Society has collapsed.
I'm sorry, that's just too funny not to mention. Also, something to darkly laugh about? What do you, Count Dracula as well?
In that spirit, here are all the contradictions of gender ideology I was able to think up before I had to throw my hands up at the insanity of it all.
Translation, here are all the misrepresentations of trans people and their beliefs that I could type before I got sleepy.
Trans women are in danger in men's spaces, and that is why they deserve access to women's spaces. Women, who worry about their spaces becoming mixed sex, are bigots.
Both of these are obvious misrepresentations of what trans people and our allies generally believe. But don't worry, as soon as we clarify what we actually feel and think, they'll just make up some other awful thing and tell people we believe that. Again, they are lying, and they know it. The gender-critical argument is that femaleness and maleness in proximity together inevitably creates danger for the female person, as directly and inevitably as the fusion of baking soda and vinegar into a science fair volcano. The argument is that trans people both know this to be true and therefore are exploiting that truth to ask for safety, while our real motive is supposedly to create an easier route to perform that abuse. But here's what we're actually trying to say on the subject. Anyone should be able to use any public restroom they need, and be confident that they won't be attacked or have their privacy invaded by anyone. This should apply to, I say again, everyone, regardless of sex, gender identity, or anything. The only reason anyone should be barred from a public bathroom is for having committed a crime that demonstrates that said individual cannot be trusted in public bathrooms, and then they're not allowed to go into public bathrooms of any kind. I may be a prison abolitionist, but if you're a danger to people just going to the freaking bathroom and minding their own business, you can live with the urinary leash. Then these abusers would finally have something specific in common with most trans people. Urinary bladders of absolute steel. You see, the truth is, It's dangerous to be spotted as being trans while society is so openly transphobic. Transbladder is a term coined to describe how so many of us train ourselves to hold it for hours beyond when we should reasonably be expected to, something that can be dangerous to our health and really anyone's health who holds it for that long. We're not saying trans women should use women's bathroom to get away from men. We're saying trans people should be able to choose their own bathrooms because our safety and privacy matters too, and everyone should be expected to not abuse people in bathrooms or anywhere else. The reality is that trans people are often not allowed to use any public bathrooms. We're often given self-contradictory information, such as how sex is supposedly immutable, and how female bathrooms are supposedly a sex-based right of the female estate. Which, then, why are high-profile anti-trans activists like Maya Forstadter saying that butch lesbians will agree to give up their sacred birthright to the throne of Familia?
Gay people owe their rights to transgender activists, who deny the reality of same-sex attraction.
So, first of all, nobody truly owes anyone else our rights, and no one has claimed such a thing. These are things that were already ours the whole time, and that were unjustly taken from different people at different times. What Ava is trying to do here is say that acknowledging gender identity as real and a significant part of who we are is denying a reality of same-sex attraction that portrays gay love as a biological reflex instead of a complex and varied category of feelings that people have for each other. I mean, even being gay at all is refusing to conform to gendered prescriptions of who we ought to be attracted to. Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman who is often cited as having thrown the first brick, which is probably not literally true, but also she definitely was there, and definitely did a ton of activism for gay and trans people, and especially the overlap of those two groups. It's almost like, since Ava doesn't understand that your gender identity and your sexual orientation are distinct but related parts of who we are, she therefore assumes that we share her failure to understand us. If we assume that she's ignorant, instead of knowingly spreading hateful lies that contribute to the dehumanization of trans people, dehumanization that frequently turns into violence, I repeat, either Ava is confidently and prolifically ignorant in the face of counter-evidence, or she is knowingly serving the will of an opportunistic hate machine in return for clicks, ad bucks, and clout. The argument that trans people are denying same-sex attraction is really freaking absurd, and the origin of this claim is the absolute moon logic that if we don't agree with GCs on key aspects of the mechanisms of sexual attraction, then we are somehow claiming that any and all gay love is wholesale non-existent. GC logic is that sexual attraction is purely derived from the interactions between your biological sex, which they conceptualize as an essence that permeates every cell in your body, set to exactly one of the exactly two quantum sex frequencies that are possible in nature. The reality is so much more complex. Trans people do not deny that people of any sex or gender identity might be attracted to each other. Attraction is a little more than if gay then crave dick, and is more of he wears the label of gay to describe the kinds of people who he tends to be attracted to. I repeat, gay men do not love other men because they are gay, but gay becomes an accurate descriptor because of their pattern of loving men. Words are descriptive, not prescriptive. By saying that personalities can't really be quantified down to a finite number of checkboxes or archetypes is not the same thing as saying people are not allowed to have a type they go for, and Ava is intentionally misrepresenting trans people this way. I'd like you to consider this. If biological sex was the one and only factor in sexual attraction, then that implies gay cis men essentially all want to fuck their own dads, and all straight cis men want to fuck their own moms. For most people, the sex or gender of the other person, by itself, isn't enough. They also have to be a whole person that we're attracted to, which is why it's really concerning when people stan serial killer shows. But you know who does deny the existence of same-sex attraction in a very impactful and important way? Transphobes do. If you acknowledge that gay and straight and all orientations are aspects of people, whole human beings, and you acknowledge that gay sex is just as meaningful as heterosexual sex, then surely you'll stop acting like heterosexual sexual violence is the only kind of sexual violence that needs to be prevented. You'll stop acting like rapey men just need to be redirected to the men's bathroom, as if the emotional pain of being violated is less painful for boys or men. You are literally demanding that heterosexuality be enshrined in policy by treating heterosexuality as an expected. As if Elton John would suddenly become a straight man if he accidentally used a stall next to a cis woman. Besides, Ava, shouldn't you know this as a lesbian? Or are you just a political lesbian, i.e. forcing yourself to reject your own natural feelings for men because you see dating as a consumer choice and you're boycotting the penis? Nah, being gay is a manifestation of love and appreciation, not a choice. And sexual violence is a result of a person choosing to violate the boundaries of another person. The root cause is cruelty and selfishness and dehumanization, not general proximity or just wanting to fuck someone really badly.
Trans women are a very tiny minority, and so they must be listened to. Detransitioners are a very tiny minority, and so they must not be listened to.
This follows perfectly from the first contradiction, because this also concerns the weaponizing of identities to push an anti-trans narrative, in this case, that of detransitioners. First off, the moral argument was never you should listen to us because there are so few of us, but rather we're getting drowned out because there are fewer of us than there are people spreading hateful lies about us. For every Critfax, there's an Ava, King Critical, you're next, bucko, Stone Toss, Posey Parker, Matt Walsh, and a Blair White for good measure. The reason to listen to us isn't because of our numbers, but because we're people. Everyone should be heard when asking for equality and safety. But really, this indicates the idiosyncrasy and self-contradiction of the anti-trans think tank. Trans people aren't real, and don't deserve to have their identities respected, nor do they deserve space to embrace their gender identity. But people who reject transness, even with self-contradictory logic, ought to be treated like they speak the word of God. Consider this. Say for the sake of argument, a trans man detransitions and declares that he has accepted his biological sex, and is now a woman, and I'm going to switch to female pronouns so I can respect the stated gender of his hypothetical closet case. She goes out, buys high heels and dresses, goes on a date with a man who holds the door for her and sweeps her off her feet. She posts on Instagram that she missed being a woman and found so much joy in embracing that identity. We both know that GCs would love that for you, girl! But those exact same choices, when made by a trans woman, are caricatures of womanhood, and reducing femaleness to Jimmy Choos and frocks. Oh wait, that regularly happens! I would also like to point out that listening to is very vague in this context. If someone detransitions, it's actually not a deal breaker for either community, because to the GCs, you're still only a person if you fall in line with anti-trans arguments. I've seen pro-trans activist accounts run by people who have detransitioned, and GCs treat those people no less viciously than the happily transitioned. Again, listen to detransitioners is a lie. What they mean is listen to people who say toxic and hateful things about trans people. The detransitioners that GCs want you to hear from are the ones who blame trans people and trans ideology for their own decisions they regret, all while taunting trans people, not trying to warn us, but trying to taunt us, with sneering promises that we'll never be happy with the results. And detransitioned people who hate trans people are extremely useful in the propaganda war, because to someone who doesn't know better, they think that person is speaking from authority, and transphobes can wink and whisper, "This is how all of them would feel if they were all honest with themselves." And suddenly I'm told that one day I will regret every pill and scalpel that had touched me. I haven't medically transitioned in any capacity, by the way. The reality is that detrans people are still part of the trans liberation community if they want to be. Consider this. Do you think the gay community would fault a man for dating a dude and then realizing he's straight, actually? In itself, no. Lots of us gays did the inverse because homophobia made it difficult for us to accept our feelings. If anything, we're just confused about how you were pushed in the opposite direction as the overwhelming current.
Gender is a social construct. But trans women need to be treated as literally female in all aspects of life.
Some examples really would have helped this one, honestly. I mean, they are treated as women. They're paid less, discriminated against in many careers, treated as inferior to men, threatened with violence every time they speak up, murdered more often than cis men. But they're also even more likely to be attacked or victimized than cis women. Transphobes treat trans men the way patriarchy treats cis women, and simply ignores everything they're saying.
Sex and gender are different, but trans women need to be treated as literally female in all aspects of life.
You literally just repeated the last one, but with an exclamation point. No, we're not saying trans women need to be treated as literally female in all aspects of life, because cis women don't need to be treated that. What does that even mean? Hello, yes, we noticed you're female, so we're giving you the female bank account. Which, by the way, is a thing that happened. Women in the 60s and early 70s in the US couldn't own a bank account unless they had their husband's signature, which meant the husband controlled the finances. Unmarried women were just flat out refused service. No, people should be treated as people. The only thing my sex determines above any other factors is whether or not I can reproduce with someone.
Sex and gender are different, but trans women are entitled to womb transplants.
I mean, inasmuch as anyone is entitled to any organ transplant, then I see no reason why uteruses should be treated as an exception to organ transplantation, nor why trans women should be excluded from receiving them. Like, we don't let people specify, my liver must go out to a straight person, because we can't let my straight junk touch a gay person, and treat that like it's not homophobic, do we? If you resent the idea that a trans woman might receive an organ transplant from you, but wouldn't resent a cis woman receiving that same transplant, that is irrational hostility to trans people, and is, in fact, transphobia. Am I accusing you of a crime if this applies to you? No. But if you're a good person, you might maybe try to work on that, just like feminists are demanding that men work on their sexism and objectification of women.
Calling a trans man she will trigger gender dysphoria, but there's nothing female or dysphoria inducing about getting pregnant or giving birth as a trans man.
One of the first ways I'd heard a trans man describe pregnancy and childbirth was that it was simultaneously a profound joy at creating new life with his lover, but also a deep, visceral betrayal of his body against his true self. He gave birth to multiple children. He bore all of that pain each time, all the way to term, and even breastfed his kids. He transitioned after his kids were grown up and moved out, and he died because surgeons were unwilling to perform a hysterectomy on a transgender patient, even when he needed it to survive uterine cancer. The reality is, we all experience different levels of euphoria and dysphoria with our gender, and to a lesser extent, even the flavor of our presentation. Like, genuine question, how many cis dudes do you think would apply to work at a restaurant if they had to wear dresses and maintain a hyper-feminine appearance and comportment at work? Trim waist, don't buck up your arms too much, zero facial or body hair, and your cranial hair must be styled in a traditionally womanly style. I know some cis dudes who would do all that for free, but for most cis dudes, that proposition is humiliating and wrong. I know cis dudes who wish they could get pregnant from their boyfriends, but for most men, including trans men, the idea of becoming pregnant is horrifying. Even things that are treated as purely the domain of one binary sex, such as facial hair, can evoke body image incongruity in people who are cisgender. Many bald men would rather have hair after all. Ava, if gender dysphoria isn't real, what psychological pain exactly are you trying to save people from by dissuading them from transitioning? Because if dysphoria doesn't exist in nature, how could we medically induce it? Why did David Reimer care about having a penis enough to even ask for a prosthetic? He was operated on before he would likely remember having one. By Ava's logic, him getting a penis should have only caused him to have dysphoria. But most people who hear that David got a prosthetic, they nod along because that seems reasonable. So why isn't it reasonable for a trans man to have that same feeling of wanting male sexual anatomy?
If the perpetrator of a crime is a trans-identified man, he is reported as a woman. If the victim of a crime is a trans-identified man, he is reported as a trans woman.
GCs want trans people reported in the most unflattering light in police reports so that they can justify generalizing individual misdeeds into an entire community. Why do gender critical types frequently reshare and repost every article posted in which a trans person is the accused perpetrator, but similar crimes by cis people don't get similar "look here" kind of activity, now do they? Why is that? Because they know that being trans doesn't make you evil, but they want to create the illusion of such. Check out our video on Salient Exemplars, a name for the tactic of attributing someone's misdeeds to the targeted characteristic, where we go into deeper detail about exactly how the tactic works.
Gender is in the brain, not in the genitals. But gender-affirming care requires genital surgery.
Requires? Again, are you the arbiter of this sort of thing? I'm pretty sure that being trans doesn't have to involve surgeries at all if you so choose, which tends to be at the heart of GC fearmongering over how trans people don't even need the surgery anymore. Anyone can just wear a dress and call themselves a woman. Remember? If you want a penis and you don't have one, achieving that want requires medical intervention. This applies to cis men who were born without or who lost theirs later in life. And it's not all in the head then, is it? So why does a different standard somehow apply to trans men? I mean, yeah, all my feelings, motivations, desires, and personality are all in my head. But those things banging around in my head are why I care about physiological states. My caring about someone else's plight is all in my head, but me acting on that care requires me to move my body. So these statements don't actually contradict each other, which itself contradicts the Endless Contradictions title, but I digress.
Stop obsessing over our genitals. We need genital surgery to be our true selves.
Yet we know that you're obsessed with what genitals we have, but that doesn't mean we're not allowed to find importance in whether we like the genitals we have or not. We're asking for privacy, you creep, which is not mutually exclusive with we should have the same medical care other people get to adjust their bodies. Taking control of our own sexual anatomy is not inconsistent with asking for privacy. Or do you think that people with penises should have to publicly register to get a Prince Albert?
Lesbians need to accept Lady Dick, but trans women are allowed to hate their own dick enough to chop it off.
The line forcing lesbians to accept Lady Dick is a willful misrepresentation of us pointing out that when you reject someone by saying something transphobic, you are being transphobic. But you always have the human right to say no to any sex or romantic advances that you do not want, regardless of why. Pointing out the flaws in logic does not mean you have to have sex with somebody. Transphobia is transphobic, not, "Oh, I just don't think we're compatible," or "I'm flattered, but no thank you." You can leave it at that, and there's no room to say the rejection itself was transphobic. But saying, "I only date real women," to a trans woman is just incredibly gross. A whole person with a life journey, and you feel comfortable assessing how legitimate their identity is based on what you think her birth sex was. Pathetic. Even wanting sex with trans people can be gone about in a transphobic way. That's what a chaser is. And yeah, most chasers are men, but plenty of them are women too. The first time someone touched me inappropriately because they saw a fursuit as permission to do whatever was a cis woman who wasn't even a furry, who thought I was a cis man. I got her to leave me alone by taking off the head. She incorrectly guessed my birth sex and walked away in disgust, as if my bulky fursuit was concealing my real sexual truth or whatever. But also, just look at the tone on display with hate their own dick enough to chop it off, when the reality is that most trans women who get bottom surgery love their penises so much that they have the surgeons delicately invert them and bring them inside. If you're cold, they're cold. Let them in. Most genital reconstructive surgery, for trans people or not, involves grafting and reshaping existing tissue the way reconstructive surgery anywhere usually does. It's all willful misrepresentations, so as to condition people into having a gut response to trans people of disgust and fear. Dysphoria isn't the result of some kind of adversarial fixation that we've chosen to engage in. It's a natural emotional response to our physical reality. If you have a penis, and you have an emotional response to having a penis that is negative, then feeling that negative emotional response is biological reality. And yet you call us delusional or self-hating when we make plans to address distress and dissatisfaction we're already feeling. I'm non-binary and gender fluid. Some days I look down and my natural emotional response to seeing my body sexed the way it is fuck yeah, I'm gonna go do a gender! And sometimes my natural emotional response is, ugh, I'm tired of this. Can we do something else yet? I didn't choose to have those emotional responses, and I'm not sure I'd want that kind of control over my own feelings, especially knowing that when I was first coming to terms with my orientation and I'd had that kind of power, I might have used it to assimilate into an easier life. But now, I'm proud of being gay, and I would time travel to stop past me from even considering changing my orientation. So when I have those same feelings about my gender identity, the logical interpretation is that I'm an ideologue who can't accept biological reality or something. Like, seriously, do we describe all cis women who get hysterectomies as hating their uterus, as if it's unnatural or wrong to find periods uncomfortable or to not want to get pregnant? Let people figure out their own bodies and what they want out of them for themselves.
Don't insult the appearance of trans women. TERFs are ugly, and they look like trans women.
My experience being queer online is that every time an ally steps out of line and calls a female TERF manly or whatever, somebody will correct them if they can. I will say one of my favorite subversions of this trope is to take perfectly normal pictures of transphobic cis women, hold it up and ask, would you want this to go to the bathroom with your daughter? And transphobic cis women, who I remind you can always tell, will go to town pointing out pixels on the neck or face that prove this person has advanced AGP. Which, she's a cis woman. So odds are her womanhood is part of her sexuality. So let's pathologize that like you do for trans women. Let's go! That statement was sarcasm, to be clear. But nah. My position, and the position of all the decent people I know, trans or otherwise, is that you don't shame people for their appearances, but for their conduct. It's not your face that's ugly, Ava. It's your words, your actions, and that shit-eating grin you wear in your profile picture while you dedicate hours to being a toxic hate-monger.
Being trans is not a medical condition, but hormones, surgeries, and even gender-affirming laser hair removal must be covered by health insurance.
Being trans isn't a medical condition, but gender dysphoria is. Ava, this is Trans 101. You say you've researched the endless contradictions of trans ideology, but you can't even get the most simple aspects right. Wanting sex is not a distress state. Loneliness is. Comprendez-vous les différences? You don't need dysphoria to be trans. And the people who think that you do are generally hateful bigots like yourself, or afraid that if their transness is made conceptually distinct from a form of pain they are facing, they won't get treatment. So they gotta get out all the trans trenders. Funny how that works.
Trans women make the covers of magazines for achievements in science, technology, and sports. Trans men make the covers of magazines for being pregnant. Progress!
Okay, but how is this a gender ideology contradiction? Your problem here is with the media, not trans rights or even trans people who were unanimously screaming, please, anyone but her. And I agree. Trans people generally fail to get the recognition we deserve. The Matrix has had a phenomenal impact on cinema ever since it came out, but much of the public is oblivious to the fact that the directors were trans women. The fact that their transness was a crucial element of how they knew how to capture all of the feelings and dynamics on screen was washed away, left forgotten like other queer influences on culture and media, such as how the author of Little Mermaid was a gay man who drew from his experiences of isolation and rejection. But it was so much more sensational for cis people to give us clumsy, exploitable compliments like brave and stunning to a former football player, someone going from hypermasculinity to glamorous femininity, coasting on the fortune she amassed performing masculinity to a stadium audience. This is not all that different from how many cis women were erased from the history books, up to and including the first woman pharaoh of freaking Egypt.
It takes a really long time for kids to access gender-affirming care, so no child is doing it on a whim. We need to improve children's access to gender-affirming care so that they can get the care they need right away, as soon as they ask for it.
These are two statements of the same problem. By the time a dysphoric kid gets so much as a consultation for an appointment, the parts of puberty that they wanted to slow down might already have happened. Like, we generally agree that people don't usually have medical emergencies for fun, and that this does not contradict the fact that most medical emergencies require you to act sooner rather than later.
Most kids only transition socially. But without access to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, trans kids will commit suicide.
Suicidality of trans people is a complex topic, and we have loads of factors that put us at a higher risk than other people. Severe body dysphoria can absolutely contribute to tipping someone's balance of whether or not they want to keep going. But the main predictor of suicidality in trans people is this: do their parents treat them as a person, and do they subject the kid to transphobia at home? Sometimes, that transphobia takes the form of, I don't want you to be trans, so I'm going to control your transitional care to try to trick you out of it. This is plainly just not a contradiction, even if we ignore the overgeneralization. You can acknowledge that most kids will want to transition socially, and that this by itself is fine for many of them, while also acknowledging that some kids might have significantly high levels of dysphoria that could warrant considering puberty blockers. This would avoid them entering into a puberty that could emotionally damage them for the rest of their lives. We know this because we all used to be kids, and those of us who ended up medically transitioning after going through puberty overwhelmingly wish we could have started sooner. Those feelings will pass didn't come true for most of us, so the idea that we need to prioritize someone who might be wrong about their feelings over the many who are sure kinda seems like the real motivation is just trying to morally mandate trans people out of existence.
Without access to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, trans kids will commit suicide, says the man who fathered children before discovering his inner woman and sterilizing himself.
Oh, so you could understand the situation, but decide not to. You're using different life experiences, different journeys, to deny everyone the possibility to be themselves. Honey, gay men who get cis women pregnant before realizing that they're gay can advocate for gay rights with the true argument that homophobia drives people to self-harm sometimes. Or does Ava also think that the Trevor Project is trying to emotionally manipulate parents into wrongly abandoning their protected belief of homophobia?
Cis people don't understand what it's like to be trans, but trans women understand what it's like to be a woman.
Ava, you don't know what it's like to be a woman in many regards. You don't know what it's like to be a woman of a different race than your own. Just because you share a sex marker with somebody, that doesn't tell you anything about what you actually have in common with them. Sex only tells us a really small part of what makes up someone, and besides a few handful of medical cases, you will have to come to terms with the fact that our social identity is considerably more important to humans than biology ever will be.
Misgendering is tantamount to a crime. but it's okay for us to call you cis.
Misgendering is as much a crime as deliberately misnaming people or lumping them into a national stereotype. Cisgender, or cis, is also the proper term. But this is all just a remake of I'm not straight, I'm normal. They want to be called normal by imposing what normal is.
Men and boys must be allowed on women's and girls' sports teams, or their feelings will be hurt. If the feelings of women and girls are hurt by men and boys on their sports teams, it's because they are transphobic bigots.
This is a tactic I'm going to call inclusion Darvo. Oh, so X group is going to be forced to share spaces with Y? We live in a society. I'm forced to share the public with literally everyone else. So trans women should get to participate in sports just like everyone else. And in sports, people get grouped into categories so they can play against people of similar ability or situation. And whenever we draw these categories, the goal is to keep the game fun for participants without being unfair to anyone we have to ask to sit out. And there's still disagreement on where we ought to draw those lines. Some of it is reasonable, and some of it just plain isn't. Telling trans women that they have an unfair biological advantage at sports simply for being trans is absurd and cruel. Sports categories should be assessed on an individual basis every time, not treating biological sex like it's an athleticism trump card. Let me put it this way. A cis woman and a trans woman both start training for the same sport. They put nearly identical amounts of time and effort into training. Neither use performance enhancement agreed to be unfair or unhealthy, such as steroids. And then the day of the race, they both give it their all and it's a tie. Was this match fair? Well, by all metrics, yes. Don't even have to ask if the trans woman was on HRT. Just the fact that it was evenly matched after even amounts of effort went into training means that this was a fair match. But transphobes will claim that this situation, which is by all reasonable metrics fair and balanced TMCR, is cheating the cis woman out of a well-earned victory. Fairness is unfair. Yet another contradiction from the anti-trans ideologues.
Physical differences between men and women don't matter in sports, but trans women need to compete in the women's category because HRT makes them weaker and disadvantaged against other men.
No, trans women should compete in women's sports because they're women. That's it. I haven't met any other trans activist who claims that physical differences don't exist, but the ones that exist between the sexes are often needlessly exaggerated and blown out of proportions to further an anti-trans agenda. And before that were exaggerated and blown out of proportion to further an anti-feminist agenda, an anti-woman agenda. That's not an exaggeration. The science behind this isn't cut and dry at all, and even the ones who say trans women have a slight advantage still advise to adjust the sport's rules, not to simply ban all trans women from competing like y'all do. Would you say that a 5-foot-tall cis woman and a 6-foot-tall cis woman are physically the same? If your answer starts with, no, but, then you've already admitted that the physical differences between people aren't always easily sexed. Honestly, even weight should be a better indicator of strength versus mass in sports than sex. If you ask me, that is. But what do I know? Sports are for nerds! Fuck that shit.
Physical differences between men and women don't matter in sports, but sports should still remain gender segregated.
Bruh, the problem isn't we don't want physical differences to be accounted for in sports participation. It's we don't want to have to face the indignity of being mistreated for our transness while we're playing sports. There are sports where cis women often have an advantage compared to cis men. Consider rock climbing. Muscle sure helps, but every pound of muscle you build is a pound of extra weight you have to carry, including when you're not using it. People who are lighter overall, be that due to their sex hormones or just their individual build, might have advantages here.
Trans women can only be searched by female security guards, police officers, or prison guards. But women are transphobic for requesting the same.
The police, as they exist now, are not public defenders. We love the myth that they are, but the reality in some places, more than others, is that they're basically a violent mob that runs around with impunity, and they just kind of get to because the people who they hurt rarely have access to recourse, and the people who benefit from that kind of brutality keep writing their paychecks. Anyway, can you explain to my gay ass why I would care about what genitals the person invading my privacy has? Again, more of the inference that heterosexuality is expected and homosexuality is an exception, and that contact is sexual by nature of the sexes of those touching instead of the context and the intent of the touching. How many straight men would suddenly be less comfortable being searched if they knew the man searching them was gay? Even if he's just as much of a stoic professional about it as his straight coworker, the suspicion of sexual predation emerges, even though straight men can and do sexually abuse other men.
Gender identity is innate and decided in the womb. Gender identity is also fluid and can change over a lifetime.
You literally grabbed two typical, ultra-simplified lines from different time periods. These are for complete outsiders who never had any transgender thoughts. However, alright, let's do a quick thought experiment. A cis man is married to a woman all his life and fathers several children with her. At a later date, he gets divorced because he and his wife have realized that their relationship isn't sustainable in the long run and that they mostly got engaged because it was part of their upbringing and cultural expectations. After the divorce goes through, he realizes that he's actually attracted to men and decides to open himself up to the idea of dating other men. Question: did this man change his sexuality? Or was he always gay, but conditioned and pressured into getting married to a woman and having kids? His feelings may have been there the whole time, perhaps suppressed or just never acknowledged. But what matters is, he's a person who should get to figure it out for himself and not be treated like it was already decided for him. This same critique was levied against gay people, especially gay men, for years because of situations exactly like this. This is again a great example of how transphobia is basically just recycled homophobia.
Sex is arbitrarily assigned at birth, but gender identity is fixed in the womb.
I'm gender fluid, so you're wrong that we're claiming gender identity is fixed.
Gender is fluid, but gender-affirming care requires irreversible treatments.
Wait a minute. Okay, first of all, Ava, we understand that some things can't be easily reversed. Part of the reason I'm not at this time pursuing any kind of medical transition is because I am gender fluid. And I'm pretty sure even if I completely switched my sex characteristics to their complements, I'd basically have the same balance of euphoria and dysphoria. I'd also like to point out that irreversibility might be a concern, but doesn't make it a bad thing. I got LASIK, which is really not all that reversible if I suddenly decided that I really liked not being able to see more than 6 feet without glasses. The artificial importance given to reversibility of these treatments is actually a tactic to get people to spend more time thinking about people regretting their procedures instead of asking, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we had more effective body modification procedures? Do you want these procedures to become reversible? Help us fund more research into the biomedical sciences and engineering. Help us discover skin grafting and organ printing techniques so that if you want your penis back, you can just get a new one. These advances could only improve the lives of trans, detrans, and cis people alike. But the fact that trans people would especially benefit from this is enough for these single-minded dipshits to act like we're playing God by doing uterus transplants.
Children know who they are, and it's also normal and commonplace not to realize that one is trans until later in life.
These are contradictory statements that can apply more or less to any aspect of who a person is. Our sense of self, and the information that we have to build that sense of self, is constantly changing. Some people know right away and never need to reconsider because they got it right the first time. Some people take forever to figure themselves out. Neither of those two statements are true for everyone. We have forces, such as hermeneutical injustice, which is when people are denied information they need to control their lives because of the groups that they are in. A very real example is how gay sex is almost never covered in sex ed. Oh, so you want to force straight teenagers to see diagrams of penis in butt sex? A bad faith jackass might reply. Because otherwise these gays who supposedly all know won't know until they're 80? To which I'd reply, I had to look at countless diagrams of penis and vagina sex, so you can maybe glance at one gay butt sex diagram, so gay and bi guys in your class can also have an overview of how to have good, safe sex.
No one is denying that sex is real, but mentioning that sex is binary and can't be changed is hateful, bigoted, and transphobic.
Disagreeing with you on its mechanisms isn't the same as saying it's not real.
And last but not least, trans women are women, because trans women are men.
Have some more? Add them in the comments.
Again, no mention of trans men are men. Very curious indeed. Since Ava called for people to share their own gender contradictions in the comments of the article, I would be remiss if I didn't cover some of them. So let's speedrun them.
Trans rights activists are all about love. Fuck off, TERF, and die in a grease fire.
If you fight back against your abuser, then you're the real abuser is logic only used by people who just want to be abusers without getting any of the pushback they rightfully deserve. I attack TERF ideology out of love. I don't love transphobes. I love the people they are harming. I'm trying to protect them out of love. That's why people take up arms in defense.
Gender has nothing to do with genitals. Then how does lopping them off affirm your gender?
First of all, genitals and gender are related but distinct. Most men, trans men included, would rather have a penis than a vagina. That's a relationship between the two things, see? That doesn't mean that men without penises aren't really men, but that the penis isn't the delimiter of who is and isn't a man. Related, but distinct. I also want to quickly call attention to the hostile terminology used here. A careful surgical procedure has been replaced with lopping off. This is because transphobes love degrading trans people as much as they can, especially if there's an undertone of sex in the abuse. Case in point, the South Park creators basically made the genitals of Oprah and Hillary Clinton into characters whose disgusting antics humiliated and overshadowed everything else about those characters or why they were chosen to be parodied. As for the actual argument, again, there's no rule saying you have to transition medically or otherwise. That's a personal choice, and the person should get to steer the decision. We've talked about how policy that requires trans women to transition is transphobic, because it robs them of control of that part of their lives, compounded by how these laws are often on the books in places where being gay is a crime, leading to some gay cis men to lie and claim to be trans, forcing themselves through dysphoria-inducing surgeries, so that they don't get executed or imprisoned.
Breasts can make trans-identifying females dysphoric, but displaying mastectomy scars, evidence of femaleness, makes them proud.
Some cis women who give birth see their belly stretch marks like a tiger's stripes, except they earned them. Female empowerment through birth! Others find them to be embarrassing and unsightly. So which of these two feelings is correct? Well, they both are, depending on the person. And would it be reasonable or absurd to tell a cis woman who uses stretch mark concealer that she must be ashamed of the child she gave birth to while getting those marks? It would obviously be cruel and nonsensical. Thank you, cisgender with no connection to the trans community. We really needed your opinion on what trans people can be proud of or not. That was sarcasm. Furthermore, it doesn't take a genius to know that scars and breasts are not the same thing. Besides that obvious bit, I would imagine there are still plenty of trans men and non-binary folks out there who wouldn't enjoy showing off their mastectomy scars. Also, dudes like showing off scars.
I got this one from chainsawing a branch down from my four-wheeler while it was parked on my moving riding mower.
I got these so I could have a chest that I feel is manly and—
Whoa! Don't you think that was a little reckless of you? You could have been irreversibly...
That being said, I can definitely see how it can be empowering to other trans people to know that having these scars isn't ugly or scary, and that you don't need to hide them at every opportunity if you don't want to. Isn't that what you want as well in the end? I mean, within the GC worldview, trans men are just confused women, and since GCs call themselves feminists, they should be respectful of this. No? No. And time. How'd we do? Damn it. That brings me to— oh, what's that? It's time to shill our Patreon and end the episode? Well, okay then. Whew, that sure was a doozy. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and since you've made it all the way to the end, I would like to invite you to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content. It helps us a lot. We regularly debunk common transphobic talking points and use our platform to educate cis people and arm fellow queer folks with counter-arguments to hateful anti-LGBTQ+ rhetoric should they encounter it. Should we reach 5,000 subscribers, we will do a breakdown of Ray Blanchard's typology of epic proportions, so tell your friends. Oh, and don't forget to check out our Patreon if you haven't already. As for me, my name is Miyoko, aka Kenuda, and I provided the voice acting for this episode. You can find me over at twitch.tv/Kenuda, though not much is happening at the moment as I'm on break. See you around!
Just keep going. This is your own milkshake, you realize that, right?